The afternoon in Austin was drenched in a harsh sunlight, thick and heavy, as if it clung to the air, slowing every breath. Along the corridors of the rescue center, dogs barked from behind dry metal cages, echoes of their yearning for affection, sharp and raw. Grace Carter, a volunteer who had been here for nearly 3 years, thought she'd gotten used to everything. The fearful eyes of abandoned dogs, the pure joy when one found a home. But today, something made her slow her steps, something hard to name. Maybe it was the weather. Spring had arrived in Texas too quickly this year, with no time to be gentle. Or maybe it was the strange silence coming from the end of the western wing, where the staff had just brought in a new dog that everyone was talking about. "Grace, you should see the new dog," her co-worker Sarah called out, her voice not carrying its usual urgency. It was surprise laced with something closer to emotion. As Grace walked over, the first thing she noticed wasn't the dog's form. It wasn't the short coat, a blend of deep brown and black, nor the strong, tall frame of the German Shepherd mix she'd seen so many times before. It was the eyes, a quiet gaze, deep and heavy with a sorrow that had no name. The dog didn't bark, didn't shrink back, didn't leap with excitement like others did when someone came near. It just sat there, back straight, head slightly tilted, eyes searching through the wire fence as if looking for a familiar face it had once known. This wasn't the look of a dog hoping to be adopted. It was the look of a being waiting for someone to return. The tag on the kennel gate bore a single scribbled name: Zoo. Grace bent down slowly, placing a hand gently on the fence, as if not to disturb the fragile silence. "Hey, sweet girl," she whispered, her voice softening without meaning to. Zoo didn't move, but her ears twitched. Then, almost without invitation, she stepped closer. No tail wag, no whimper, just a light touch of her nose against Grace's fingers through the gap in the fence. A touch so faint it hardly counted as contact, yet it sent a sharp pang through Grace's chest. In that moment, Grace knew this dog wasn't like any other she had met. Not just because of her calm demeanor or eyes that looked as if they had lived many lives, but because of her presence. A presence you couldn't look away from. That made you feel as if walking away meant losing something sacred. Zoo didn't just need a home. She carried a story, perhaps of separation, of loss, or simply of a love that had once been immense. And even though Grace knew nothing about her past, she felt as if she had just stepped into an unfinished chapter of a life. A door had closed somewhere, and somehow she now held the key. Sometimes emotions don't need words. Just a look, like Zoo's, can make you stop, listen, and believe that some creatures are here to reach the most fragile parts of who we are. Grace remained standing there, eyes locked on the silent dog behind the fence. Of all the animals that had passed through this shelter, and she had met hundreds, none had ever made her stop like this. It wasn't about appearance, though Zoo was striking in a quiet, understated way. A beautiful German Shepherd mix, her short coat a blend of deep brown and black, like old polished oak, her back straight, her neck held high. It wasn't a look that begged for protection. Zoo didn't act vulnerable. It was her eyes, amber and faded, deep as a winter lake, looking straight through Grace, as if peering past the wire mesh, past time and space, in search of something that was no longer there. Zoo didn't spring to her feet at approaching footsteps, didn't wag her tail to win favor, didn't whine for attention like most newly arrived dogs. She just sat, her ears slightly tilted, as though listening for something only she could hear. Each time someone walked by, her head would lift, tracking them, not with desperation, but with a quiet question. "Is it you?" And each time, as the strangers passed without stopping, Zoo's eyes would slowly drop, another quiet disappointment. Not enough to break her, just enough to make her quieter. Grace noticed every small motion, the way Zoo sat neatly, never sprawling out like dogs that had given up hope, the way she tucked her paws in, still maintaining a certain poise, like a habit left over from someone who once loved her well. Each tilt of the head, each glance, seemed to say, this was not a dog abandoned for misbehavior, but one left behind for reasons too painful to speak. "Zoo's not like the others," Sarah said softly from behind. "No chip, no collar. But the people said she jumped into their yard like she was running from something. They said she looked sad. Sad like a person." Grace didn't reply. She crouched down to meet Zoo's gaze, and just looked. The way Zoo looked back made something catch in Grace's throat. She didn't blink nervously, didn't avert her eyes as if trust had been shattered. She looked directly at Grace, not pleading, but with a calm acceptance that hurt to see, as if to say, "If you understand, then you already know. I don't need to explain." This wasn't the gaze of a lost animal. It was the gaze of a soul holding on to its last memory, like a piece of silk about to be carried away by wind, trying to keep it safe in trembling hands. Zoo didn't move, only looked. But in that gaze, Grace felt herself being pulled into something bigger than a rescue case. She scanned the kennel. Zoo's water bowl was full, her food untouched. No claw marks, no frantic pacing. Only one item lay in the corner. A small, pale blue cloth, old but clean, carefully placed, as though someone had taken time to fold it before leaving. Grace stared at it, then back at Zoo. Her heart clenched. A stray wouldn't guard something like that. And if someone had cared enough to give her something so personal, why was she here? The question didn't need an answer, because in Zoo's eyes, Grace saw part of it. She wasn't lost. She'd been left behind, not out of neglect, but by circumstances even she didn't fully understand. And the most heartbreaking part was, she didn't blame anyone. She was just waiting. A breeze moved gently through the long hallway, carrying the scent of sunlight and the old wood of rusted doors. For a moment, Grace felt as if she were standing inside a room full of unsent letters. And Zoo, somehow, was the keeper of everyone. She lowered her head. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, not sure if she was promising Zoo or herself. Behind the fence, Zoo's ears twitched slightly, and for a brief, fleeting second, her eyes softened, not because she trusted right away, but because, for the first time in many days, someone had stopped long enough to see her. Some creatures don't tell stories with sound, they tell them with their eyes. And if we're patient enough to listen, we'll realize those eyes hold whole worlds of unspoken truths, where memories are still intact, where loyalty hasn't broken, and where love is still waiting to come home. And then, as if answering that wordless whisper, Zoo slowly stepped forward. Not hurried, not anxious, each movement gentle, as if walking on water. Grace stayed perfectly still. She didn't reach out. She didn't call. She knew that for dogs carrying a deep loss, haste feels like threat, and silence is the softest invitation. And Zoo, with the instinct of a being that had once loved deeply, understood this better than anyone. When only a few handspans separated them, Zoo stopped, tilted her head slightly, and gently pressed her nose to the back of Grace's hand, through the rough wire fence. There was no bark, no eager lick, no sign of excitement. Just a touch, so light it was barely there, and yet it weighed as much as a spoken truth. Grace's heart skipped a beat, as if her body understood something before her mind did. Something deep inside her stirred, not because she pitied an abandoned dog, but because of the way Zoo touched her. Trusting, calm, heart-breakingly restrained, as if in that brief contact was the memory of many days, a sense of familiarity never met, overlapping fragments of a story untold within a voiceless soul. Grace exhaled softly, afraid to move. She feared even the slightest motion might send Zoo retreating, like a fragile dream chased off by the breeze. But Zoo didn't move away. Her amber eyes softened, no longer searching for anything beyond this moment. Her ears relaxed. Her shoulders dropped, her body beginning to believe it was safe. "Hello, sweet girl," Grace whispered. And for the first time, The words felt like more than a term of endearment. They felt like acceptance, like welcoming home someone long lost. Sarah stood at the end of the corridor, still frozen. "Did you see that?" she said, her voice like wind. "Zoo's never come close to anyone like that, not once." And Grace knew. It wasn't coincidence. Zoo had chosen. When she slowly moved her hand to touch the fence, Zoo didn't back away. She pressed her head closer, as if trying to get just a little nearer, as though the metal bars were the final line between what she had lost and what she hoped to find again. A small sound came from deep in Zoo's throat, not quite a whimper, more of a sigh, a release of the loneliness she had carried too long. Amid all the noise in the row of kennels, the barking, the scraping, the urgent bodies vying for attention, Grace and Zoo created a silence so deep it felt sacred. One human, one dog, one moment. No explanations needed, no reasons required. Just a quiet connection, like the meeting of two hearts that had once been broken, now finding each other again. Grace slowly pulled her hand back, her gaze never leaving the eyes that looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. She knew that feeling. The feeling when a soul that had closed itself to the world opened again, but only for you. Zoo sat down, her eyes still locked on Grace. The rhythm of her breathing, steady, unhurried, showed a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of rescue, but of recognition. Like she'd just seen something buried in her memory come to life. Maybe Grace wasn't the one, but she was someone like the one. The voice, the eyes, the way she sat without asking anything. Zoo had once known someone like that, and today she felt that presence again. Grace stood up slowly, still not turning away. Before leaving, she spoke again, not as a promise, but as a quiet vow to herself. "I won't give up. Wherever you came from, whoever let go of you will find the truth. And maybe we'll find each other too." Zoo didn't move, but her ears twitched slightly, her head tilted. And in that moment, her eyes, though still heavy with sorrow, gleamed with the faintest glimmer, like a single golden dust mote slipping through a crack in time. Some touches don't need skin, only presence. And there are looks not meant to ask, but to remind us. Some souls exist to make our hearts ache, and quietly open the door for something miraculous to walk in. As Grace walked away from Zoo's kennel, her steps still carried the same slow rhythm as when she had been sitting in front of her. She passed other cages, where barks, scratching, and pleading eyes had weighed on her heart for 3 years. But today, everything else blurred behind the amber gaze that had quietly knocked on a door long closed in her heart. A place untouched for a long time. Back at her small desk at the end of the intake room, Grace sat quietly for a long moment in front of the computer screen. Her hands rested on the keyboard, but didn't type. She was listening, not to the sounds outside, but to the echo still lingering in her chest from when Zoo pressed her head into her hand. Such a simple touch, yet so heavy with memory and trust. Grace knew she couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Zoo couldn't become just another forgotten file in a database. Something about that dog told her its past wasn't simply a case of abandonment. Zoo had been someone's everything, a part of a family, a child's world, a deeply rooted memory. And now what Zoo needed wasn't just a roof over her head, but a chance to return, to be recognized, or at the very least to have her story acknowledged as something that mattered. Grace opened the shelter's social media page, usually filled with adoption appeals that vanished into the noise. But this time, she knew she had to do something different. She didn't write it like a listing. No breed, no age, no weight. Instead, she began with a line that came from the heart. "Today, I saw a pair of eyes that stopped me in my tracks, not out of fear or excitement, but because of a beautiful sadness, a silent waiting from a dog named Zoo, just brought into our shelter." The words poured out like slow raindrops off a rooftop, gentle, hesitant, but carrying something too deep to keep inside. Grace described Zoo not through facts, but feelings. How she didn't bark, didn't beg, didn't ask to be touched. She spoke of those eyes, eyes that had once been loved, and still believed that love hadn't disappeared, just lost its way. She didn't call it an adoption post. Instead, she wrote, "We don't believe Zoo was abandoned. Maybe she's trying to find her way back. If you've ever seen this little girl, if you've ever loved a dog whose eyes could speak, or if your heart stirs even a little when you look at this image, please help us find the missing pieces. Maybe someone out there is waiting for this." She attached 3 photos. One taken from a distance, Zoo sitting silently in her kennel, a shaft of sunlight cutting through the wire fence, casting a gentle glow across her dark brown fur like a thread of gold brushed onto her back. One close-up, her eyes not bright but subdued, amber like smoke and quiet fire, holding the depth of things that had never been spoken aloud. And the last, an image Grace had taken secretly, just after the moment their hands met through the fence. Zoo standing close to the bars, ears slightly down, eyes focused on Grace, not with longing, not with demand, but with pure presence. When she clicked post, the room remained still, the only sound the soft whirring of the ceiling fan overhead. But Grace felt as though she had just laid the first stone in building a bridge from silence to connection, from isolation to understanding. She didn't know what would happen next. She wasn't expecting a miracle, but she believed that when a story is told with sincerity and true emotion, it will find its way to the hearts that need to hear it. What Grace couldn't have predicted was this, that those few simple lines, written on a sweltering afternoon at the rescue center, would soon become the spark that set off a series of unexpected events, where Zoo wouldn't just rediscover who she was, but would also help heal things thought to be irreparably broken, between 2 families who believed they were strangers. Every story begins with a moment, and sometimes all we have to do is tell it with a heart wide open, because somewhere, out there might be another heart quietly waiting to be called by name. By the time Grace left the shelter that evening, the Austin sky had faded into a pale lavender, smoky and soft as it blended into dusk. In her palm, she could still feel the chill of the wire fence, where Zoo had pressed her nose into her hand. That gentle touch lingered like something sacred, as if something had passed through skin and settled deep in memory. She didn't sleep when she got home. Her laptop stayed open, her phone beside her, eyes fixed on the post about Zoo. She wasn't sure why she kept watching. Maybe instinct, maybe something unnamed was quietly urging her on. And then, like a quiet but relentless wave, the post began to spread. First came the shares from the shelter's regular followers, encouraging words, emotional reactions. But then comments started to appear that made Grace sit upright. "I think I've seen this dog used to walk with a little girl, around 8 years old, brown skin, curly hair, adorable. The 2 of them were always together. Well, the girl held the leash, but it looked more like 2 best friends who never left each other's side, like a shadow and its light." The comment was from Margaret Dawson, an older woman who seemed to be a long-time resident. Grace immediately clicked on the profile. It was real. A listed address in Oak Haven, just 10 minutes from the shelter. She sent a message that night, her tone both clear and urgent. "Hi, Ms. Margaret. My name is Grace. I'm a volunteer at the Austin Animal Rescue Center. Could you tell me more about the girl and the dog you saw? Even the smallest details might be really important in this case." While waiting for a reply, Grace opened the photo of Zoo again. This time she zoomed in on her eyes. Those smoky amber eyes held a weight even language couldn't capture. Not simple sadness, but a kind of longing so deeply ingrained it had become a part of her. As if every breath Zoo took still carried the shape of someone she believed would return. Grace reread the intake notes. A line that once seemed insignificant suddenly jumped out with sharp clarity. "No reaction to new toys, but when she saw an old toy in the yard, A yellow rubber bone. She stared at it for 15 minutes without looking away. Shows deep emotional attachment to the object. Grace froze. A toy? A yellow rubber bone. Simple, ordinary, but enough to hold the attention of a dog otherwise withdrawn and distant for 15 whole minutes. She placed her hand on the desk, her palm trembling. Maybe, in Zoo's mind, that toy wasn't just an object, but a symbol, a link to a face, a voice, a friendship she never allowed herself to forget. Her phone vibrated. A message from Margaret had arrived. I clearly remember. They lived in a blue house, corner of Maple Street. I don't know the girl's name, but they had 2 dogs. One was an older shepherd, very calm. People called him Rex. I used to see the girl reading on the lawn, both dogs lying beside her. It looked like a painting. That last sentence tightened something in Grace's chest. A picture so peaceful, so vivid it refused to fade. And for Zoo, perhaps that lawn was the very place her heart belonged. And when that place vanished, all her footing went with it. Grace pulled up a map. Maple Street, Austin. Slowly she scanned for the blue house, a small corner of the city, but maybe once an entire world for a child and 2 dogs. She wondered, where is Rex now? Is that family still there? And if they're gone, did they cry when they had to leave Zoo? Or did they slip away in silence, leaving her eyes turned toward an empty gate, forever waiting? Grace turned to look at Zoo through the office window. The kennel lights had dimmed, just a soft glow at the far end of the hallway. In that light, Zoo still sat in the same position, back straight, eyes facing outward, as if all night she hadn't moved an inch, a posture both steadfast and heartbreakingly vulnerable. When memory lives on in the eyes of a dog, it means love was never left behind. And anyone who stops long enough to truly listen can hear an entire story told not in words, but in waiting that never left. Grace didn't sleep that night. The cold white lights in the shelter's back office stayed on past midnight. In that stillness, she sat alone before the glowing screen, where Zoo's story was slowly unfolding, like a silent diary written in glances and gestures. Margaret's message, the blue house on Maple Street, the curly-haired girl, the old shepherd named Rex, all of it now illuminated by one haunting detail, a yellow rubber bone. Grace reopened the intake report. What had once seemed like a generic behavioral note now read like a wound on the page. No response to new toys. Paused for a long time in front of an old yellow rubber bone found in the yard where she was picked up. Did not touch it. Stared at it for over 15 minutes. She opened the field images saved by the rescue team. In one photo, among dry grass and fallen oak leaves, the toy appeared. A rubber bone, its yellow faded by sun and time, one end frayed. It lay lifeless on the ground, an object of no consequence. But then Grace noticed Zoo in the background. Still upright, eyes locked on that object. Suddenly, it was no longer just a toy. Zoo didn't approach, didn't sniff, didn't play. She only sat, perfectly still, watching it like someone mourning something sacred. Grace zoomed in, focusing on Zoo's face. Her amber eyes reflected no panic, no fear, just a quiet sorrow so deeply human it made Grace's breath catch. As if Zoo already understood that what had been lost couldn't be brought back, but still chose to be near what remained. A toy doesn't traumatize a dog, but it can make one ache, deeply. If that toy once belonged to a friend, a sibling, or even a mentor, its presence becomes a lifeline to memory, a silent bridge between then and now. The name Rex surfaced again in her mind. Margaret had described him. A calm, older dog who once walked beside Zoo and the girl, a senior shepherd. He could have been the true owner of that toy. He could have been the one who taught Zoo how to walk beside someone without a leash, how to sit quietly next to a person without being called. And one day, Rex simply vanished from the picture. Grace sat for a long time, wrapped in that thought. She imagined a young dog, not yet able to grasp the concept of death, searching for her friend every day, returning to the same corner of the yard, to the toy that still smelled faintly of companionship. And when others stopped grieving, when the girl finished crying, when the adults packed away old photos, Zoo remained. She kept vigil beside that toy, like a ceremony that had no words. Grace rose in silence. It was 2 a.m., but she couldn't wait for morning. She printed the photo of the toy, walked the quiet hallway toward Zoo's kennel. Her rubber-soled shoes tapped gently on the floor, mingling with the soft, sleepy breathing of the dogs around her. Zoo was still awake. She didn't stir, didn't bark. She only lifted her head as Grace approached. Her ears twitched slightly, and her eyes met Grace's. Calm, alert, as if she'd been sitting there all night, waiting for someone to return with a missing piece. Grace sat down, said nothing. She took the printed photo from her pocket and slowly slid it through the wire mesh. Zoo looked at it, didn't snatch it, didn't growl, just looked, with the same gaze captured in the field photo. Head tilted, ears alert, eyes fixed on the image of that small yellow toy. And then, slowly, Zoo pressed her head against the bars, as if trying to breathe in something long gone but still sacred. Grace whispered, "That was Rex's, wasn't it?" Zoo didn't nod, didn't wag her tail, but her eyes softened, and a quiet exhale escaped her, like a thread of memory finally loosened from its knot. In that moment, Grace knew she was right. The toy wasn't just a clue, it was a symbol of friendship, of home, of a past Zoo had never truly left behind. No matter how much time had passed, no matter who had tried to forget, Zoo, in her way, still held on. She had returned, and she was still hoping someone might care enough to understand. In a world full of forgotten things, one dog still remembered, and when she looked at that worn yellow toy, she didn't see rubber or dirt. She saw sunny afternoons. She heard laughter. She saw the silhouette of a friend now gone. And more than anything, she saw herself in a time when she had never been alone. Returning from the storage room with the printed photo of the old toy, Grace once again stood in front of Zoo's kennel. The dim light of the night lamps now faded into thin golden strands across the cement floor. She knew she couldn't solve everything in one night. But what had happened? From the way Zoo looked at the toy, to the way she gently pressed her forehead against the bars, was enough for Grace to understand. This journey had truly begun. Zoo was still awake. She didn't seem tired, didn't doze like the other dogs around her. Instead, she sat right where she had been, silent and upright, eyes fixed down the hallway, toward where Grace had returned. The way she waited didn't resemble a dog hoping for food or affection. It was as if she was guarding a memory, afraid that if she closed her eyes, it would disappear again. Grace sat down, slowly and carefully, like someone stepping into a sacred space. She didn't immediately hold up the photo again. Instead, she sat in silence, watching Zoo, not with the eyes of a shelter volunteer, but with the intuition of someone who had known loss and understood that some wounds didn't need fixing, only someone to sit beside them. Zoo looked at her, not with excitement, not by leaning in, just with quiet eyes. And in that stillness, Grace saw something deeply mature. Zoo didn't beg. She didn't cling. She wasn't desperate. She had made peace with loss. But strangely, she still waited. And Grace, with all the gentleness in her voice, whispered, "We're going to find the truth, I promise." There was no sound in response. But what happened next made her freeze. Zoo tilted her head, just slightly, almost instinctively. But in that small gesture was something ancient and raw. In those amber eyes, something shifted, real, visible, like a thread of hope slipping through after days of darkness. That head tilt, what others might brush off as a reflex, was to Grace an answer. No need for words, no need for tail wags, just a tilt, a softened gaze, ears no longer tense, a dog who had chosen, even just a little, to believe again. Grace didn't leave right away. She pulled out her phone, opened the photo of the toy once more, and held it closer to the fence. Zoo looked, then slowly stepped forward and pressed her forehead against the bars, right where the photo touched, as if the memory, that image, was being relived through her eyes, as if Grace was the only one who had ever cared to preserve what others overlooked. Grace let out a quiet sigh, more like a prayer than breath, a silent offering for a soul too used to loneliness. "We're doing this together, okay?" she whispered again, her eyes steady and soft, the kind of gaze only someone who had witnessed a spirit break could hold with conviction. Zhu didn't respond right away. But then, after a beat of stillness, she stepped back slightly, then lay down, chin resting on her front paws, eyes still on Grace, now softer, calmer. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't weariness. It was acceptance, a gift of trust, fragile but real. As Grace stood, she didn't turn away quickly. She stepped back slowly, as though each movement might shatter the fragile space of trust they'd built. And in that final glance, she saw Zhu still lying there, eyes following her, not distant, but with a look that seemed to say, "This time, maybe it's different." On the drive home, the Austin night wind slipped through the cracked car window. No music, no radio, just the quiet beat of her heart and thoughts circling Zhu, the small yellow toy, and the blue house that had once held 2 dogs and a girl who read on the porch. Grace knew this journey wouldn't be easy. But after that head tilt, after that quiet press against the bars, she was no longer alone. Some promises don't need to be spoken out loud. They just need an eye that listens, a heart that doesn't back down, and a moment quiet enough for 2 souls to find each other through silence. From there, the journey begins not to rescue, but to rediscover the fragments of memory that once meant home. The next morning, as a misty haze clung to the old trees of Austin, Grace left the shelter earlier than usual. It wasn't routine. It wasn't duty. Today, she carried a promise, a whispered vow made behind the bars of a kennel, for a dog who could not speak, but somehow knew how to still a human heart. Guided by Margaret's story and an address on Maple Street, Grace drove slowly through quiet bends, where the morning sun streamed through tree branches and cast light across untrimmed lawns and time-worn rooftops. The neighborhood had a kind, worn-in feel to it, like it had witnessed years of simple joys from families now scattered. And then she saw it, the blue house. Not grand, not eye-catching. It appeared like a painting covered in the soft dust of time, faded gray shingles, shuttered wooden windows, a low fence blanketed in moss. The stone path from the gate was broken and uneven, a few slabs jutting above the grass. The front yard had overgrown, with weeds pushing through flower pots that hadn't seen pruning in a long time. The porch, once perfect for autumn afternoons, was now littered with dry leaves, spiderwebs clinging to the corners. Grace stepped out of the car in silence. Her eyes moved across every detail: an overturned metal bowl at the edge of the brick steps, a chipped piece of white-painted wood from the fence, and most notably, a rusty collar hook still mounted on the porch post, etched with the faint shape of a fishbone. Once decorative, now forgotten. No one had to tell her. This was once Zhu's home. Just then, the sound of water hissing from a garden hose drifted over from next door. Grace turned and saw an elderly woman, small-framed and silver-haired, watering pots of lavender outside. The woman noticed Grace standing by the gate and walked over, her face kind and curious. "Looking for the Winters house?" she asked. Grace nodded gently. "Yes, I'm from the Austin Animal Rescue Center. I think I've met a dog who used to live here." She pulled out her phone and showed the woman the photo of Zhu from the night before, forehead pressed to the bars, eyes caught in memory. The woman stared at the screen for a long while, then nodded slowly. Her eyes glistened. "That's her. Her name was Zuzu. When they first got her, she was just a tiny thing. The Winters called her Little Rex. She followed their old shepherd everywhere, never more than a step apart." Grace swallowed hard. They walked together every evening, One time it drizzled, and I saw little Sophie wrap a scarf around Zuzu, holding an umbrella for her. She'd sit on the porch reading, singing softly, and Rex would lie beside them, eyes half closed like he was listening to a fairy tale. Her words touched something deep in Grace, a warm world that had once existed, now living only in the memory of a neighbor and in the quiet gaze of a dog who never forgot. After Rex passed, the woman continued, everything changed. Sophie was heartbroken. I once heard her in the backyard, whispering stories to Zuzu through tears. She said, I don't want to leave because Rex is still lying here. It was heartbreaking. So they moved away? Grace asked softly, already fearing the answer. The woman nodded. Sophie's father lost his job. Her mother was in a car accident, had to give up her main work. They couldn't afford the house anymore. I heard they moved to an apartment complex in the east, no pets allowed. They left Zuzu temporarily with the Hendersons nearby. But just days later the little one escaped, ran across the neighborhood to come back here. Grace suddenly remembered the note in Zoo's intake file. Dog jumped into Henderson's backyard. Origin unknown. So she wasn't lost. She had returned home. Even though no one was there. Even though the door was locked. Even though the yard had grown wild. She still came back, still searched for traces of Rex, of Sophie, of those summers filled with laughter on the porch. Grace said nothing more. She thanked the woman with her eyes, then quietly approached the gate. The rusted gate moaned under her touch, and something stirred in her. Like Zoo herself had once stood here at twilight, staring into an empty yard, waiting for someone who never came. She placed her hand on the weathered wood, closed her eyes, and whispered inwardly, Zoo, I've found the place you called home. And if I can't bring you back here, I promise to bring what you love back to you. In the hush, a breeze drifted through, nudging the rusty collar hook to swing. A soft metallic clink rang out, a gentle chime of the past knocking on the door of the present. Some houses don't need lights turned on to be home. All it takes is a dog who remembers, a person willing to return, and a promise that's never forgotten. Because the place that was once home will always be home even if time fades the paint, even if the yard grows wild, even if no one's been there for a very long time. As Grace stepped away from the blue house on Maple Street, the old gate creaked gently behind her, like a sigh closing a chapter long asleep. But inside her, that past had begun to wake. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were slowly coming together, quietly, with emotion. And at the center of it all was a girl named Sophie. The elderly neighbor had spoken her name in a breath as soft as memory, as if Sophie once filled this peaceful street with laughter every afternoon. Sophie Winters, a little girl with curly brown hair, often seen in a blue sweater, barefoot in the backyard where Rex and Zoo used to lie side by side. But what lingered in Grace's mind most was the quiet way the woman had said, after Rex passed, Sophie hardly spoke to anyone. She just sat out back, leaned in close to Zoo, and whispered, like Zoo was the only one left who understood her. Grace drove slowly back to the rescue center, the image looping in her mind. A small girl, arms around a dog's neck, whispering things no adult could hear, words that lived only in a world shared by two children. Zoo had been just a pup then. But Grace had no doubt. In her heart, Sophie had become her anchor after Rex was gone. And when Sophie disappeared too, Zoo hadn't just lost a friend. She had lost the very reason to call a place home. Back at the center, Grace didn't head to her office. She detoured to the kennels, where Zoo, as always, sat silently on her old fabric bed, her eyes fixed down the corridor, staring at nothing but shadows, and the quiet breathing of other souls also waiting. Grace sat without speaking. She simply looked at Zoo, longer than usual, then pulled out the small folded piece of paper the old neighbor had given her before she left. Sophie was a special child, the woman had said. I don't think she ever truly said goodbye to Zoo. If anyone can reach her heart again, it's Zoo. Inside the paper was the Winters' new address, An apartment complex on the east side of the city. No dogs allowed. No lawn. No sunlit porch steps. Grace looked at Zoo and whispered gently, "That little girl, Sophie. She's the one who still has your heart, isn't she?" Zoo didn't respond, as usual, but her eyes shifted. Not sharply, but subtly, like a wave pulling back to sea. A movement just enough to say, yes. Sophie was never in the past. Sophie was what Zoo had been waiting for, every single day, in silence. To Grace, Sophie was no longer just a name in someone else's story. She was the living link to Zoo after Rex was gone. She was the only place Zoo tried to return to after being left behind. The neighbor had told Grace how one rainy afternoon, Sophie pulled Zoo under the porch roof, dried her off with her sweater, then sat down, pressed her forehead to Zoo's, and whispered, "Where's Rex, Zoo? We'll find him, right? Please don't leave me too." Grace could picture it, and her eyes grew damp, not out of sorrow, but because, in a world where adults live by logic and plans, a little girl and a little dog had once made a silent promise, not to leave each other. Zoo kept that promise. She went back, to where Sophie had been, where Rex had been, where laughter once rang through summer air. And Sophie, perhaps, still clung to that pain, unspoken, unheard. Grace no longer had any doubt. If she wanted to truly reach Zoo's heart, she had to find Sophie. Not to bring her back, but to reconnect the thread neither of them ever got the chance to tie, when everything vanished too soon. She stood, looked at Zoo again, and this time her gaze carried something stronger. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say, "Wait for me." She simply placed a hand on her chest, where her heart beat steady, and made a silent promise. "Zoo, I'm going to find her. Not for me, not for the story, but for you. Because I know what you're waiting for isn't just a home. It's a whisper from long ago. Zoo, don't leave me." Spoken once more. But this time, no one will leave. Some people go, but never truly leave. They remain in a dog's eyes, on moss-covered steps, in a rusted water bowl. Sophie wasn't just a girl who once lived on Maple Street. She was the last place Zoo's heart decided to stay. And maybe that heart was still waiting for Zoo in a quiet corner of the world, still calling her name. After leaving the shelter that windless afternoon, Grace didn't head straight home. She sat in her car for a long while, the paper with Sophie's address still clenched in her hand. Outside, the sun dipped low, its light fading across the windshield like paint dissolving on a canvas. In her mind, Zoo and Sophie were always together. Two children with nowhere left to lean on but each other. The address led to a high-rise apartment complex with plain white walls, wedged beside a busy street in East Austin. No lawns, no porch steps, no shade where a dog might stretch out under the fading sun. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, in the corner. Its windows faced a gas station across the road. Everything here felt cramped, temporary, and necessary, like the life of someone forced into choices they never wanted to make. Grace knocked, her heart beating slow but steady. The door opened. Standing there was a woman in her 40s. Thin, tired eyes, shoulders wrapped in a worn jacket. A woman who had been through too much for too long. "I'm sorry to bother you," Grace said softly. "I'm with the Austin Animal Rescue Center. I believe I'm caring for a dog that used to belong to your family." The woman froze. Her eyes widened with recognition, and then fell into something heavier. "Zuzu," she whispered. The name escaped like a wound reopening. Grace nodded. She invited Grace in. The apartment was small. The air smelled faintly of soap and weak tea. Scattered belongings filled the space without much order. In the corner, a girl sat silently. Sophie. No longer a child with bouncing curls or a carefree smile. She clutched an old book, staring out the window at nothing but gray sky. Her mother sat down first. Her voice cracked as though holding too much for too long. "We didn't have a choice," she began, slow and aching. "My husband lost his job. I had to quit after the car accident. Everything unraveled so fast we couldn't stop it. The house was foreclosed. My health got worse. And when we moved here, they were clear. No pets allowed. No exceptions. Not even temporary. Sophie's grip on the book tightened. She didn't turn around. But Grace noticed the faint tremble in her shoulders. I tried to explain to her, the mother said. Told her we could find Zuzu a better home, a family who'd love her. But Sophie... Her voice broke. It took a while to continue. She didn't speak to me for a week. She slept in the backyard with Zuzu every night, crying until she passed out. That last night I overheard her whisper to Zuzu, "You'll wait for me, won't you? I'll find you, even if no one else does." Grace swallowed hard. "Did you know?" she said, her voice light as a leaf crossing a tabletop. "Zoo is still waiting?" Since the day she arrived at the shelter, she hasn't slept through a single night. New toys don't interest her. She just stares, then turns away. But whenever I show her the photo of the old toy that once belonged to Rex, she lowers her head, as if she's listening for a sound only she can hear, as if she's still searching for a voice only she knows. Sophie turned at that. She looked at Grace, her eyes wide, full of feeling, but she said nothing. She leaned forward, as if to hear more clearly. "Zoo came back," Grace continued. "She didn't run away, she returned. She jumped into a stranger's yard, walked streets no dog should walk alone, just to go home, to find what was left of you. Even if the house was empty, even if the door was locked, even if everyone said it wasn't possible." The mother lowered her head. A tear slid silently into her hand. Grace spoke slowly now, as though building a bridge between two aching hearts. "I didn't come here to blame anyone. I came because I believe, if there's anyone in the world who can remind Zoo that life is still worth trusting, it's Sophie. And if Sophie is still waiting for a promise to be kept, then I believe that time is now." A hush fell over the room. Sophie stood slowly, step by step, and walked closer. She didn't look at Grace. She turned to her mother. "Can I see Zoo again?" And in that question there was no anger, no accusation, only a quiet faith. Once buried deep, now gently resurfacing for the sake of a dog who never turned her back. Some goodbyes don't happen because love fades, but because life forces us to act against our hearts. But the beautiful truth is, real love never disappears. It just gets lost waiting patiently for someone brave enough to bring it home. On the drive back to the shelter, Grace sat still in her parked car for several minutes after arriving. The gray sky dragged its clouds slowly across the skyline, and the rescue center's weathered windows reflected the image of a young woman holding a story with no ending. Yet, her meeting with Sophie left her heart heavy, but it also lit a small flicker at the end of the road. Something she couldn't yet call hope, but wasn't despair. And as she stepped inside the office, not even having taken off her coat, Sarah approached, her eyes unable to hide a look. Part surprise, part emotion. "Someone is waiting for you in the front room," Sarah said, her voice calm but marked by something serious. "She came because of Zoo. You should hear this." Grace walked quickly toward the lobby. There, by the large window veiled in sheer white curtains, sat a woman in her early 40s, upright on a worn wooden chair. A pale gray coat wrapped around her, one hand resting gently on a frayed, lilac-knit scarf. Her face was delicate, but worn from months of quiet worry. She didn't glance around like someone casually looking to adopt a pet, nor did she seem uncertain or unfamiliar. She simply sat, still, as if she had come a long way just to be present in this exact moment. Grace approached gently. "Hi, I'm Grace, the one who wrote the post about Zoo." The woman stood, her voice low and raspy, like someone who hadn't slept. "I'm Rachel Martinez. I read your post last night, sometime after 2 a.m., and since then, I haven't been able to look away from that dog's eyes." Grace invited her to sit without asking questions yet. People with that kind of look didn't come to ask for a dog. They came because something inside them had broken. Rachel took a deep breath, fingers gently gripping the edge of the scarf. "My daughter, Isabella, is 11. She used to be so joyful, imaginative, always talking to her stuffed animals, making up stories. But a year ago, we were in a car accident. I was barely hurt, but Isabella was trapped inside for nearly 10 minutes. Since that day, she stopped talking. No tears, no screaming, just silence. She just stares. For hours, like something was swept away and she can't reach it anymore. Grace's heartbeat softened as she listened. And then we met Luna, Rachel continued, a therapy dog from a program in Houston. Luna changed everything. She didn't try to make Isabella talk. She didn't crowd her. She just sat beside her, quietly. And one night, Isabella started whispering. Tiny stories. A few words. But the first since 6 weeks of silence. Every morning, Luna sat beside her while she drew. Every night, she curled up by the bed. No one asked her to. She just knew, like she was born to heal. Grace nodded slightly. Nothing about this felt rehearsed. Every word had the quiet pulse of something real. But Luna had to retire. She was getting old. The vet said she couldn't keep working. And since then, Isabella slipped back into silence. We've tried everything. Specialists travel new environments. Nothing brings her back. Nothing. Rachel looked up then, meeting Grace's eyes for the first time. Her gaze wasn't desperate. It was the gaze of a mother speaking with the last unbroken piece of her heart. I don't know why, but the moment I saw Zoo's eyes, I felt it. Something about her reminded me of Luna. Not just the sadness, but the way she looks at people, as if she knows who's hurting, and moves toward them. I know how this sounds, but I believe there are connections we can't explain, and I believe Zoo might be the one, the only one who can reach Isabella. Grace said nothing for a moment. Every part of Rachel's story echoed something deep in her, a quiet rhythm that resonated with her memory of Zoo's eyes. The same look that once made Grace sit down without knowing why, driven not by duty, but by something wordless that told her, this dog wasn't lost. She was searching. Maybe she was never searching for just one person. Maybe Zoo carried something deeper, an instinct that pulled her toward the broken-hearted and made her stay. Grace spoke quietly. Zoo hasn't connected with any potential adopters. She doesn't respond when visitors come near, but I think today might be different. Rachel gently stroked the edge of her scarf, trying to still the tremble in her hands. May I bring my daughter to meet her? She asked, softly. Grace nodded, heart tightening. Could Isabella come tomorrow? Rachel nodded. And they both knew this meeting would not be just a test. It would be a moment where two silent wounds might recognize each other, between a girl who had never stopped remembering and a dog who had never stopped waiting. Some souls aren't meant to speak much. They were born to walk beside one another in darkness, where words are too much, and love is felt through a look, a breath, or the gentlest touch. And sometimes, a dog doesn't need to be a miracle, only to arrive at the moment when a fragile heart is just about to break. The next morning, Grace arrived at the shelter earlier than usual. She didn't make coffee. She didn't turn on her computer. Her morning routine was left behind, because today only one thing mattered. In the quiet kennel wing, Zoo lay in her usual corner, eyes half open, gaze fixed down the corridor where footsteps came and went. But today was different. When Grace approached, Zoo stood up. Not eagerly, not anxiously, just with purpose, like she knew that today required her full presence. At 9:50, the front door creaked open. Rachel stepped inside, still clutching the lilac scarf from the day before. She was alone. Isabella wasn't with her. This visit was for Zoo and Rachel. Grace nodded at Sarah and led her out back to the small courtyard where Zoo had always been more comfortable during first encounters. No one spoke on the way. The breeze was light through thin trees. Warm sunlight fell evenly across the patio tiles. The stillness wasn't awkward. It felt prepared, like something that had been waiting a long time for the right people to arrive. As soon as Rachel stepped into the courtyard, Grace unclipped the leash and let Zoo decide. What happened next left Grace, and Sarah, who watched from inside, completely speechless. Zoo didn't hesitate. She didn't scan the area like she usually did. She didn't turn away as she had with dozens of others. She walked toward Rachel, steady and intentional, like something in the air had reached her, a frequency only she could hear. Rachel froze, hand still holding the scarf. Her eyes tracked every step Zoo took, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, something she had dreamed, imagined, but never expected to witness. When just a few steps remained, Zoo stopped. She looked up, straight into Rachel's eyes, not with wariness, not with uncertainty, but with stillness. A gaze so direct it stilled the heart, not with sadness, but with the feeling of being seen, completely, without words. And then, Zoo took one more step, enough to gently press her damp forehead against Rachel's hand, the same hand that had gripped that scarf all night, clinging to hope. Rachel slowly bent down. No rush, no fear, guided by something quiet and natural. Her hand trembled, but when it rested on Zoo's head, every worry, every layer of hesitation melted away. Zoo didn't flinch. She didn't pull back. She leaned in, pressing her cheek into Rachel's palm like a child finding something lost. And Rachel began to cry. Not loudly, not in anguish, just tears, silent, steady. She didn't know why, only that something inside her, long dried out, had begun to soften. "She's just like Luna," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The eyes, the way she touches you, the breath. It's like Luna came back, but brought something more this time." Zoo didn't move. She stood still, forehead against Rachel's hand, listening, as if letting this woman say all the things she hadn't dared to say in so long. And in that moment, Grace understood. Zoo was not just a dog left behind. She was a bridge between broken hearts. Rachel sat down, and Zoo quietly followed, laying her head on Rachel's knee. No command, no hesitation, as if all the space between them had been erased in a single breath. Grace didn't step in. She stood at the threshold, throat tight with quiet emotion. Some might call it coincidence. Others would say Zoo was just behaving out of habit. But Grace knew, deeply, that some bonds can't be measured by logic. Some connections only exist between souls that have known pain and still choose to open up again. In a world full of wounds, sometimes all it takes is the gentle touch of a dog to be the first hand reaching into the dark. And sometimes, the miracle isn't that they arrived on time, but that they waited so patiently for someone to finally come back. The next morning, as the early sun dried streaks of dew along the eastern stone walls of the shelter courtyard, Grace stood by the window, her eyes on the empty yard below. A light breeze rustled the trees, as if preparing the space for something delicate, something sacred. Despite years of witnessing reunions and goodbyes, her heart still couldn't settle as she thought about today. A morning when a girl who barely spoke to anyone would meet a dog who had nearly stopped believing anyone would ever call her home again. Rachel arrived on time, composed and gentle like the day before. But today, by her side, was Isabella, a petite girl in a pale purple hoodie, clutching a worn photo frame to her chest. No greetings, no signs of shyness, just wide eyes that scanned the room as if asking, "Is this a place safe enough to leave a piece of my memory?" Grace stepped forward with a warm smile and soft eyes. She didn't speak much, just knelt slightly to greet Isabella with a quiet gaze. No pressure, no prompting, just presence, like a soft blanket gently laid across a cold night. Together, the three of them walked into the private meeting room, a small, cozy space with soft carpet, warm light, low chairs, and a few familiar toys scattered about. In the corner, Zoo lay already waiting, her head resting on her paws, eyes half closed, as if listening to the world through the rhythm of her breath. When the door opened, Zoo didn't jump up. She didn't wag excitedly like dogs eager to greet visitors. She simply opened her eyes, then, slowly, turned her head towards the girl at the doorway. Grace, keeping her breath steady, nodded quietly to Rachel. She knew this moment didn't belong to the grown-ups. Isabella didn't rush forward. She stood still for a long while, as if reading an invisible signal coming from the dog across the room. Her gaze wasn't afraid, just cautious. The kind of caution that comes from having lost something too precious to risk trusting again. Zoo slowly sat up. No theatrics, just a small movement. Enough to show she'd noticed, she'd recognized. She didn't approach. She waited. The same kind of quiet waiting she had once offered Rachel, with her forehead pressed gently to her hand. Isabella clutched the photo frame tighter, still watching Zoo. Then, slowly, like a falling leaf, she took a step forward. Then another. Her shoes barely whispered against the carpet. And when only a few feet separated them, she stopped. No one urged her on. Rachel sat quietly in a distant corner, holding her breath. Grace stood silently by the door, her hand pressed to her chest, as if holding something fragile from breaking. Zoo remained seated, her tail moving slightly. Not wagging, just a subtle, thoughtful gesture. A kind of hello that said, "I see you." Isabella knelt. She didn't look at anyone. She simply sat just a half-arm's length from Zoo. Her eyes flickered, not with fear, but as if trying to decide if this was real. Then her small hand, still holding the photo until now, reached out slowly, timidly, and touched Zoo's ear. Zoo didn't startle. She tilted her head gently, letting her softer ear rest into Isabella's palm. No bark, no noise. But as the little fingers ran lightly across the warm fur, one word broke the stillness. Soft. Just one word. Small. Barely above a whisper. Like wind brushing across water. But it was the first word Rachel had heard from her daughter in nearly 2 months. Rachel sobbed, hand over her mouth. Grace was speechless. Zoo remained still, eyes on the girl, as if she was nodding to the word itself, a silent response. "Yes, it's me. I'm here." Isabella said nothing more, but her silence no longer felt locked. It breathed, it pulsed. It was the silence of a door just barely opening. Grace turned away, her eyes blurred with emotion. She knew then. The miracle hadn't arrived with fireworks or bright lights. It had come through a single touch, one word, one soft ear, and a heart that chose to stay. In a world full of quiet wounds, perhaps nothing heals like a creature who listens with their whole being. And when a child who no longer speaks to anyone whispers "soft" to a dog, we need no further proof that connection has begun. The next morning, sunlight gently filtered through the office windows as Grace sat at her desk, still caught in the afterglow of yesterday's encounter. She couldn't shake the moment Isabella said "soft." A word so short it seemed weightless, yet it had touched something inside her that she'd forgotten could tremble like that. And Zoo, always calm, always knowing when to retreat, had stayed, had given that withdrawn child a moment of real presence, without force, without conditions. Grace was reviewing Zoo's care log when footsteps echoed hurriedly in the hallway. Sarah appeared, a bit breathless, face tinged with surprise. "Grace, someone's here to see Zoo," she said, hesitant. "It's the Winters family." Grace's heart skipped a beat. She stood immediately, moving towards the front room without another thought. When the door opened, she saw them. Sophie's mother, thin and worn, the same woman who once gripped her hands while describing her daughter's last moments with Zoo in the backyard. And beside her, a girl with loosely curled hair, teary eyes, and a well-loved stuffed animal clutched in her arms. Sophie. She stood quietly, but her body trembled slightly. Her gaze was locked on the back courtyard door, where Grace knew Zoo now sat beside Isabella, the girl who had just spoken her first word in weeks. "What brings you here today?" Grace asked gently, walking toward Sophie with the same softness she had shown Isabella. "I read the post," Sophie's mother began. But before she could say more, Sophie interrupted, her voice uneven, as if she wouldn't be able to bear holding the words in any longer. "I just want to say goodbye." Grace felt her chest tighten. "I don't want to take Zoo away," Sophie continued, tears now streaming freely. "I know I can't. But I need her to know I still remember, that I never forgot her. I just need her to know that." Grace knelt, her eyes meeting Sophie's. No words were needed in that moment, only a quiet understanding between two hearts shaped forever by the same dog. She nodded, then led Sophie through the hallway and out into the small courtyard. Isabella sat on a soft blue mat, Zoo's head resting in her lap, eyes closed as if breathing out a nameless dream. The scene was so peaceful, it almost felt untouchable. And then Sophie appeared, standing in the doorway, just for a moment. But it was enough. Zoo's eyes opened immediately. Her expression didn't shift in panic or surprise. She simply looked, really looked, at Sophie, as if a piece of memory had just stepped back into the light. Sophie didn't step forward. She stood still, clutching her stuffed animal. Zoo lifted her head, never taking her eyes off the girl. Then, slowly, she rose and walked toward her, each step gentle, hesitant, as if asking herself, is that little person still waiting, like she promised she would that last night in the backyard? When just one arm's length remained between them, Zoo stopped. Sophie stayed still. Then she knelt quietly and reached out, not to Zoo's head or back, but to the ear she used to stroke when whispering secrets in the yard. Zoo leaned forward into the hand. Both Grace and Rachel, watching from a distance, saw it. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was the closing of a chapter that had never truly ended. Now, it could finally exhale. Sophie wept, not in grief, but in the gentle release of a small heart that had once had to grow up too quickly, forced to say goodbye to the thing she loved most. Zoo, after a moment, turned and walked back to Isabella, lay down beside her again, tail giving a soft flick, as if to say, I'm still here, but you'll always be with me too. Some bonds don't need to be held tightly. They only need a moment to prove they once existed deep, honest, and unforgettable. And sometimes, healing doesn't come from keeping what's gone, but from seeing it move forward at peace in the right direction. The moment Sophie gently touched Zoo's ear and broke down in tears in the center courtyard, Grace stood quietly long after everyone else had left. In her mind, Zoo was no longer just a dog who had once been abandoned. She had become a presence, real, distinct, and slowly revealing herself as a character with depth and purpose, not someone who happened into these two girls' lives by accident, but by quiet design. Grace recalled Zoo's eyes when she looked at Sophie, not just recognition, but as if watching a memory being gently unwrapped and returned to its rightful keeper. And in that same gaze, Zoo had then turned toward Isabella, not out of confusion, but as if to say, the past matters, but it doesn't have to hold us. It can also be a peaceful goodbye. Back in her office, with sunlight slanting across the window and warming the wall where she hung pictures of dogs who had found their homes, Grace sat at her desk and opened Zoo's digital intake file. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled down to the bottom. There, barely noticed until now, was a faded note. Shepherd mix, possible Luna lineage, Houston therapy dog program. Her heart skipped a beat. Luna wasn't just a name. Luna was the dog. The therapy dog who had helped Isabella speak again. The beginning of everything Rachel once clung to during their darkest days. And now maybe, just maybe, Zoo was the continuation of that light. Grace didn't hesitate. The next morning, she drove for over an hour to a small veterinary clinic in the suburbs, marked only by a weathered wooden sign. As she stepped inside, the soft scent of peppermint oil and old paper greeted her. A tall, slender man with white hair was watering a cactus by the window. He turned at the sound of footsteps, his gaze gentle and familiar, like someone used to meeting people carrying more questions than answers. Grace asked his name. He nodded, offering a warm smile carved from years of compassion. Dr. Richard Hawkins. He had spent 3 decades working with the Houston Therapy Dog Program, and he was the one who had cared for Luna, from her earliest training to her retirement. Grace didn't waste time. She opened her laptop and showed him pictures of Zoo from every angle. She spoke plainly, sincerely. She described how Zoo reacted around children with emotional trauma. how she would remain quiet when needed, how she instinctively moved closer when someone was hurting, even when that person didn't know it yet. She spoke about Isabella, about Sophie, and how Zoo connected with both without hesitation, without retreat. Dr. Hawkins didn't interrupt. He simply listened, then turned to a drawer and pulled out an old, yellowed folder. After flipping through its contents, he placed a page on the table. It was Luna's breeding record from her final years. At the bottom, under the line "Final Litter Before Retirement," were 3 names. One of them, Zura, a name that might have been miswritten as Zoo during the transfer process. Next to the name were detailed notes: dark coat, amber eyes, highly sensitive to emotional signals, calm temperament, strong signs of empathy, known to seek out children in emotional distress. Grace didn't say a word. She simply placed her hand gently on the paper, like touching something sacred. It was confirmation. A once loose thread now anchored. Zoo was Luna's daughter, not just in blood, but in soul. She had inherited Luna's deep capacity to heal, to sense, to listen to the things no one says out loud. Grace understood then that nothing she had felt about Zoo had been imagined. Every moment, the subtle touches, the way Zoo looked at someone, the quiet companionship, had meaning. Zoo hadn't just found Isabella and Sophie by chance. She was fulfilling a quiet mission that had started before she was even born. Luna had given Isabella her voice, and now Zoo was continuing that legacy. Not just with one child, but 2, both standing on the thin edge between loss and renewal. On the drive back, Grace didn't play any music. She opened the window and let the wind thread through her hair. The question of who deserved Zoo no longer mattered. What remained was something bigger, something deeper, and something that might need more than one heart to understand fully. If Zoo had been born from a dog who once saved a child's world, then maybe her purpose wasn't to choose between them. Maybe her purpose was to connect them, to be the bridge between fractured hearts, so they could learn again how to love, how to trust, how to heal. Some dogs aren't born just to find a home. They're born to become a shelter for hearts that once forgot how to look up at the sky. And sometimes they carry more than instinct. They carry memory. They carry the breath of a soul that once loved too deeply and is still loving through the body of the next generation. When Grace returned to the shelter that afternoon, the turmoil of having to choose between 2 futures had faded. In its place was a strange, quiet clarity. As if the moment her fingers touched Luna's file, an answer had risen from somewhere deep within. The late-day light spilled gently across the familiar wooden walls of the special care room, casting golden streaks that danced across the aging vines clinging to the window frame. The air was so still, she could hear the breeze slipping through the mesh of the kennels outside, soft as a sigh. Zoo was waiting in the bonding room, a space designed for first meetings between dogs and potential adopters. Isabella had arrived early. She sat on the gray rug, hands clasped on her knees, eyes drifting toward some invisible point, as if replaying the feeling of their first touch. Not long after, Sophie entered. She paused at the doorway, said nothing, just looked at Zoo with a gaze that was part longing, part hesitation. 2 girls, one who once knew Zoo as a soulmate, and one who had just found her voice because of her, now sat at opposite ends of the room, like 2 ends of a thread not yet tied. As always, Zoo didn't rush. She stood, walked calmly to the center of the room, and looked at each child. No barking, no eager running, just a slow, intentional pace, her tail swaying softly. She stopped beside the toy basket in the corner, the one always left out by the staff. Then, with the calm familiarity of a dog who'd lived through more than most, Zoo leaned down and gently picked up an old rope toy, a frayed green cord with faded plastic tips, still carrying the faint scent of afternoons in a long-lost backyard. She turned and carried the toy to the middle of the room, right into the space between the 2 girls. Grace, standing silently near the door, didn't dare blink. Zoo didn't drop it right away. She held one end in her mouth, looking at Sophie. Then, with a subtle nudge of her paw, she pushed the rope slightly toward Isabella. Then she used her nose to inch it back toward Sophie. Her tail moved gently, her ears relaxed. She was waiting, not for approval, but for understanding. No words were needed, no instructions. The two girls stared at the rope. Neither moved. Then Isabella glanced at Sophie and slowly reached down, her fingers wrapping around one end. Sophie hesitated, just for a breath, then did the same. The rope now rested between their small hands, like a bridge that had always been there, just waiting to be touched from both sides. Zoo sat, her tail swaying a little more, eyes content. Grace walked forward slowly, careful not to break the moment. In her heart, every question she'd ever carried unraveled quietly. It was no longer about who Zoo should go home with. It was never about who deserved her more. The real question now was, how do you preserve a moment like this? A moment where a dog, with nothing more than patience and presence, taught people how to share something they didn't think they could. Connection. Sophie was the past. A piece of Zoo's childhood etched into windswept afternoons and whispered secrets beneath backyard trees. Isabella was the now, the doorway just opening, the first breath of hope after long silence. And Zoo, rather than retreating from the past or rushing into the future, had chosen to stay exactly in between, where memory and possibility met. She had chosen to connect, to hold, to open her heart wide enough for both. Isabella tightened her grip. Sophie smiled, the first real smile in days. Then together they tugged gently, not a struggle, a game, the one Zoo loved. Zoo sprang up, tail wagging faster, her mouth opening in a playful bark. The air in the room shifted, suddenly filled with lightness, movement, laughter. It was no longer a room for decisions. It had become a room where something precious had just begun. Grace turned away, tears welling in her eyes. Only one thought echoed now. Zoo had made her choice. And it wasn't a choice between. It was a choice together. A path no one had considered, but the only one that made perfect sense. Some dogs don't need to bark to be heard, don't need to whimper to make us listen. They speak through actions, through their eyes, through an old, frayed toy. And in that strange and quiet simplicity, we come to understand, love isn't meant to be possessed. It's meant to be shared, to take hold of one end of the rope and slowly, gently, step closer together. When the old rope toy rested gently between two small hands, and Sophie's first laugh blended with Isabella's silent nod, Grace knew something had shifted. The tension in the room was no longer about who would keep Zoo, but was slowly transforming into something gentler, something more hopeful. The question now was, is there a way for no one to have to say goodbye? Grace waited until the game ended, until Zoo lay stretched out between the two girls, breathing steadily, tail wagging lightly as both of them stroked his thick, soft fur. She walked over to the group of adults standing by the doorway, Rachel and the Winters couple, who had been watching in quiet awe and uncertainty. No one spoke. The silence held the weight of waiting, for someone calm enough to ask the question they all felt but hadn't yet said. Grace took a soft breath and spoke, her voice gentle, like an idea that had formed over days of watching Zoo's gaze. I don't think we need to choose. All three adults turned to her, eyes full of questions but not surprise. It was as if they had all touched on that thought, but hadn't dared to speak it aloud. Zoo is special, Grace continued, her eyes still on the dog lying between the two girls. Not just because he listens or understands, but because he knows how to belong without being tied to just one place. He doesn't divide his heart, he expands it. She looked at Rachel, then at the Winters couple. So instead of asking one family to give up this rare connection, what if we created a new way forward? One where both families share Zoo, a custom schedule built around the girls' needs, a shared model, founded on trust, understanding, and love. The room was silent. Only Zoo's steady breathing filled the space, and the quiet crinkle of cloth in Rachel's hand. She was gripping the old lavender scarf, eyes glistening. "Share a dog?" Mr. Winters asked, not doubtful, but genuinely wondering. "Is that even possible?" Grace nodded. "There are therapy programs in Houston that have started testing it. Dogs rotate between households, not as a trade-off of affection, but to build a web of connection. And I confirmed this morning, Zoo is Luna's pup, the therapy dog who helped Isabella heal. Maybe that instinct is inherited, and maybe Zoo was born to do this." Rachel was quiet. Her gaze shifted to her daughter, then to Sophie, and what surprised her was that Isabella wasn't retreating. She was talking now, sharing stories about her favorite games, about dreaming of Zoo sitting beside her while she read. Sophie listened in silence, then gently spoke of her memories, of rainy afternoons in the garden, with Zoo's head on her lap as she whispered secrets no one else knew. They were sharing, naturally, without walls, without jealousy. And Zoo, as always, lay between the two of them, a living bridge between two worlds. In the end, it was Zoo's gaze that made everyone nod. When Grace stepped forward, stroked his head, and softly asked, "Zoo, are you ready?" He opened his eyes, looked at her, then turned to Rachel, then to the Winters, and finally laid his head back down on the old rope toy. A message clearer than words. He didn't want to be chosen. He wanted to stay, with both, to hold memory and move forward with the present. Perhaps sometimes the right answer isn't about who deserves more, but how wide a heart can open to make room for everyone. And Zoo's heart had no borders, only pathways, connecting memory, the present, and the future, where all wounds had the chance to heal, not through separation, but through gentle connection. Since the day both families agreed to Grace's proposal, a new rhythm began to form around Zoo. He no longer belonged to just one home. He became the soft thread weaving together two seemingly different households. Scheduled visits became routine, and afternoons with both Sophie and Isabella walking Zoo together turned into a familiar joy. Peace and hope flowed like a wordless melody, woven from trusting eyes, small hands brushing fur, and laughter that had never before echoed through rooms once filled only with silence. But even the most beautiful rhythm can hit a wrong note. That afternoon, the city park was bathed in soft sunlight. A light breeze rustled the leaves above, humming like a lullaby. Rachel brought Isabella to their usual meeting spot, where the Winters family was already seated under the shade of a large oak tree. The group lounged on a picnic blanket, chatting and laughing about how Zoo had learned to nudge open doors with his nose, and their plans to build a corner in both houses for him, complete with 2 pillows, 2 bowls, and a picture frame labeled "Double Home." Zoo lay peacefully, head resting between the girl's legs, eyes half closed, as if floating in the warmth of 2 familiar heartbeats. It was a perfect afternoon, until the sound of a bicycle bell rang from behind. A boy, around 9 years old, pedaled fast, trying to catch up to his friends. Whether distracted by the crowded park or thrown off by the uneven grass, his bike veered sharply toward where Zoo was lying. Though he slammed on the brakes, the front wheel lightly clipped Zoo's shoulder before stopping. The bump wasn't hard, just enough to jolt Zoo upright, his paw slightly limping, ears flattening instinctively. But to Isabella, the moment tore through her like a sudden blade, shattering the fragile shield she had only just learned to rebuild. Her eyes widened, lips trembled, and then she let out a high, piercing cry. She lunged toward Zoo, wrapping her arms around his neck, sobbing uncontrollably. Rachel, driven by the instincts of a mother who had seen her daughter struggle between trauma and healing, rushed forward. She pulled Isabella toward her, voice sharp with both fear and frustration. "She's panicking. I told you, we need to keep Zoo under constant watch." Her eyes turned to the Winters family, who were approaching with bewildered concern. "How could you not be paying attention? Why were you so careless?" Mr. Winters opened his mouth to speak, but his wife gently touched his arm, her voice trembling. "We're so sorry. We didn't see the boy coming. He came from behind." Sophie stood frozen, gripping Zoo's leash tightly. She looked at Rachel, not with fear, but with deep hurt. She seemed about to say something, but only lowered her head, glancing at Isabella still crying in her mother's embrace. Zoo whimpered softly, a sound like breath held in too long. He limped between the two groups, gaze dimming. He seemed to sense the fracture forming in the space he once held together. No one said anything more. The laughter was gone. The sunlight faded. What was once a moment of harmony now echoed with a quiet tension. Rachel picked Isabella up, held her close, and without looking back, murmured to Grace, "I think we need to reconsider. Maybe this model was too ideal." Then she walked away. Behind her, Sophie quietly sat beside Zoo. She stroked his shoulder and whispered something no one else could hear. But in her eyes, the light that had slowly begun to return, now dimmed again, pulled back into the shadow of a loss that had no name. Grace stood between the two halves, her heart stretched thin. A minor accident, seemingly insignificant, had cracked something wide open. Some things feel solid until the smallest fracture shakes them. But that doubt isn't the end. It's a test to see what truly holds. And sometimes, only after something slips do we begin to listen more closely to each other's hearts. After the tearful afternoon at the park, the atmosphere between the two families grew heavy, like a sky before an unannounced storm. Rachel hardly let Zoo out of her sight. Sophie no longer arrived at the center punctually as before. Grace, though still smiling when others inquired, harbored countless unresolved questions within. She understood that Zoo wasn't seriously injured, and that Isabella had calmed down after a long night in her mother's arms, but she knew the deepest wounds often aren't visible on the skin. To ease the tension, Grace decided to proceed with the community therapy session she had planned weeks prior. The session was held at a special care center for children facing challenges in communication and emotional development. Though Rachel hesitated, she eventually agreed to let Zoo participate, on the condition that someone would closely monitor him. The Winters couple were absent. However, Sophie had her sister send Zoo a small handkerchief embroidered with her name, neatly folded in the side pocket of his food bag. That morning, the center was busier than usual. Children with diverse personalities and expressions, some alert, others distant, entered the communal area one by one. Grace gently led Zoo through the space, each step deliberate, as if she were guiding a steady heartbeat into a room filled with uneven rhythms. Zoo maintained his familiar calm demeanor. No barking, no rushing forward. Just wide, observant eyes, then settling beside a soft rug in a corner where the light streamed in just right. Children approached gradually. Some sat down, others watched from afar. But Zoo remained patient. He didn't demand attention. He simply waited, ready to be approached on their terms. Then Liam entered, a 7-year-old boy with tousled hair, always clutching an old Rubik's Cube, and never making eye contact with anyone except his mother. Everyone knew Liam had severe autism, making him difficult to reach. His mother followed closely behind, hands trembling, as if each of his steps required her to suppress an unnamed fear. Liam paused upon seeing Zoo. His eyes widened, but he didn't turn away as usual. He didn't scream, withdraw, or panic. Grace instinctively held her breath. She looked at Zoo, who remained still, tail unmoving, eyes fixed gently on Liam, a gaze so calm and understanding it seemed to anticipate the boy's thoughts. Liam took another step forward, still holding his Rubik's Cube, eyes never leaving Zoo. His mother moved to intervene, but Grace subtly signaled her to wait. The room thickened with anticipation. Then a miracle occurred. Liam sat down directly in front of Zoo. He placed his cube on the rug, and, in an unprecedented move, reached out to gently touch Zoo's back. Zoo responded minimally, turning his head slightly, stretching his neck, and resting his muzzle on Liam's knee. Eyes closed. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The surrounding adults barely dared to breathe. Liam lowered his head, his hand beginning to move along Zoo's back, fingers initially trembling, then gradually steadying. He then whispered something, inaudible, but his mother burst into tears. For the first time in years, she heard her son utter a purposeful sound, not just an unconscious repetition. Grace turned to Rachel, whose previously stern face had softened, eyes red but no longer tense. "Zoo isn't just meant for one child," she murmured, as if realizing something her heart had resisted. "My daughter needs Zoo, but the world needs him too." The ensuing silence wasn't empty. It was an open space, allowing hearts to absorb, understand, and accept that true love isn't about possession, but about letting what we cherish shine, soar, and fulfill its purpose. Some moments, seemingly random, open doors to profound understanding, and some beings, though small, carry within them the power to awaken the best in humanity. Zoo doesn't belong to a single home. He belongs to such moments, where his presence can rekindle what seemed long extinguished. Zoo's impact on Liam didn't just resonate within the therapy center that day. It quickly spread throughout the community. A staff member had inadvertently recorded the interaction, and the video went viral online, amassing hundreds of thousands of views in days. People dubbed it the awakening moment, referring to Zoo with affectionate titles like Silent Angel and Miracle Dog. Messages flooded the center. Thank you notes from parents, inquiries from social workers, and adoption offers promising Zoo a luxurious, unburdened life. Among these was an application that made Grace pause. A middle-aged couple, owners of a chain of upscale veterinary clinics, residing in a suburban mansion with expansive gardens, 2 personal animal care assistants, and a history of supporting animal rights programs. They claimed to have watched Zoo's video with Liam repeatedly, convinced that such a dog deserved a perfect environment, one where he could truly shine without being confined by the emotional limitations of small families. The letter they sent was printed on thick paper, bearing formal signatures, and accompanied by a substantial donation to the center, a gesture meant to show goodwill. They didn't explicitly say they were better off than the 2 families currently caring for Zoo, but every word in the letter implied as much, that while love was one thing, the ability to provide, financially, spatially, professionally, was what would allow Zoo to maximize his true potential. Grace held the letter in her hand, sitting silently in her office, where sunlight streamed through the window and fell across a work desk worn down by years of caring for hundreds of lives that had passed through. On the desk was a photograph of Isabella resting her head on Zoo, and Sophie laughing beside them, leaning to the side, her hand outstretched with an old toy. Behind them was a gentle afternoon. Not a mansion, not a vast backyard, no glossy equipment, just 3 hearts leaning into one another, learning to heal slowly through patience and empathy. She knew the offer would make many people hesitate. In a world where material wealth is often used as the measure of fulfillment, it's easy to believe that better conditions must mean a better life. But Grace had seen things that money could never buy. The look in Zoo's eyes when lying between the 2 girls, when he laid the frayed rope down between 2 trembling hands. She had felt it in every moment Zoo sat quietly beside someone, never called by name, only there to be present, to listen in his gentle silence. She knew that if Zoo were sent away, he would have a spacious yard, gourmet food, a professional therapy training schedule, and the chance to help many people. But she also knew there are some things a dog cannot carry with him if separated from the place where he left part of his memory, where 2 children once learned to believe in life again through the light in his eyes. Grace stepped out of her office and walked to the backyard, where Zoo lay basking in the sun, Sophie's embroidered handkerchief still loosely tied around his neck. When she sat down beside him, Zoo lifted his head and leaned against her leg, a familiar reflex. Grace stroked his head, her gaze thoughtful. "Zoo," she whispered, "do you want to leave this place? To go somewhere with everything except the two children who need you every day?" Zoo didn't respond with a bark, nor a whimper. He simply leaned forward, rested his head in Grace's palm, and let out a long, quiet sigh, as if within that exhale lay his answer. Sometimes, the best thing we can give isn't measured by how much we offer, but by how well we preserve what has already touched someone's heart. And some beings weren't born to live in grand castles, but to dwell in the simplest corners, where cracks are waiting to be healed by loyalty and love that asks for nothing in return. After days of wrestling between the dazzling appeal of the wealthy couple's offer and the gentle glow radiating from the heartfelt bond between the two little girls, Grace chose to stay silent in front of the media. She focused solely on listening to Zoo, and listening to the small but unwavering hearts that had been changed by him. And in that silence, something unexpected began to grow. Not from adults, but from the two elementary school girls who, more than anyone, understood what Zoo truly brought into the world. One afternoon, after finishing her homework, Isabella carefully opened her laptop and typed the first line on the blank screen of a brand new blog. Sophie sat beside her, holding an old photo, the first picture of the two of them with Zoo, where the frayed rope toy lay on the floor like a thread connecting two worlds. "Hi there, we're Sophie and Isabella, and this is Zoo, our four-legged friend who helped us heal things we thought were impossible. We call this space Zoo's Circle of Healing. If you're feeling sad, lost, or just need somewhere to write hard things to say out loud, this place is for you." Grace cried when she read those opening lines. No adult guidance, no marketing strategy, no flashy design, just a sincere and humble call from two children who once had their voices and trust stolen, now opening a space with their own hands for other small souls like theirs. At first, the blog only had a few visits, but then a teacher in Arizona read it and shared it with her special therapy class. A parent group in Oregon posted the link on a forum. A single mom in Ohio messaged that her son, who had just lost his only dog in a storm, finally wrote a few lines after reading Sophie's post about missing Rex. In less than 2 weeks, the blog's inbox began to overflow. Letters came in with trembling subject lines. "I don't know where to start. I thought no one understood me. I wish I had a dog like Zoo." Some kids sent drawings. Some wrote just a single line. "I miss Mom." But they all had one thing in common. They believed Zoo would understand. Sophie and Isabella didn't just read the messages. They replied, not with empty advice, but with their own lived experiences. "I used to think no one could hear me, until Zoo rested his head on my knee," Isabella wrote. "I thought I'd never laugh again, until Zoo brought over his old toy and waited for me to smile first," Sophie added. When Zoo was shown the printed letters, he would often nuzzle the paper gently, then lie down beside them, as if quietly listening to every pain waiting to be comforted. One day, Grace arrived at the office to find a large parcel placed outside the center. Inside were more than 30 drawings sent from students at a school in Montana. They'd drawn Zoo surrounded by colorful rings, each ring labeled with a child's name, and a small wish. One wished for their mother to get better. Another wished for their first friend. One simply wrote, "I wish Zoo sleeps well every night." Grace stood in stillness before the childlike colors and limitless hope that a single dog had managed to awaken. And then she understood. The best choice for Zoo wasn't the biggest house, but the place where he could continue to be a bridge, not just between families, but between souls who needed one another. A dog can't answer letters, but he can inspire letters that might never have been written otherwise. He can't build a website, but he can create a circle where everyone feels they belong. And sometimes, a blog, no matter how imperfect, can become the very first seat where a child finally sits down to speak about their sadness for the first time in their life. The final days of spring passed gently, and the blog Zoo's Circle of Healing continued to receive heartfelt messages from all over. Sophie and Isabella took turns replying, sometimes with written words, simply with a photo of Zoo curled up asleep by the window. But what made each response special was the feeling it gave. Someone was truly listening. Then one morning, just as Grace set her coffee cup down on her desk, she received a call from Houston. On the other end was a representative from a respected therapy center that had once worked with Luna, Zoo's mother, before the dog retired. The woman's voice was full of warmth and confidence. "We've been following Zoo for a while, and if there's any candidate who can carry on Luna's legacy in guiding the next generation of therapy dogs, it's Zoo." The invitation came with a proposal. They wanted Zoo to come to Houston for 3 weeks, not just for training, but to serve as a living example. A dog with not only unique instincts, but real-world experience in community connection. 3 weeks might not sound long to adults, but for 2 little girls who had learned to stand back up through Zoo's presence, it was a gap not easily filled. That evening, Grace gently sat down with both families in the community room at the center. On the table was a detailed plan from Houston, complete schedules, accommodations, and care team. Zoo would have a personal trainer, be closely monitored, and most special of all, Luna, though retired, was living with a nearby family and would be brought in for a special reunion. The moment Grace finished speaking, silence fell over the room. Sophie bit her lip, eyes brimming with tears. Isabella clung tightly to Zoo, pressing her face against his neck as if every passing second was a step closer to losing him. Rachel gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, while the Winters exchanged worried glances. 3 weeks is too long, Sophie whispered, not looking at anyone. I already lost Rex. I don't want to lose Zoo, too. Isabella said nothing. She just tightened her grip. All eyes turned to Grace, as if hoping she would offer a safe answer, an alternative plan, a polite refusal. But Grace said nothing. She simply opened her phone, pulled up the blog, and held the screen out to the 2 girls. On it was a newly posted comment from a girl named Hannah in Florida. "If I had a dog like Zoo, I think I wouldn't be afraid of the dark anymore." Simple words, but they rang like a bell in the stillness. After a long silence, Isabella released her hold around Zoo's neck. Her voice didn't tremble, nor did it break like when she first whispered the word soft. It was steadier than any adult could have expected. "If Luna helped so many people," she said, lifting her head to look at Sophie, "then Zoo can too." Sophie turned to her. For the first time, neither of them held on to Zoo to keep him close, but to let him go. Grace sat in silence, needing to say nothing more. The very next day, both families began preparing for the trip to Houston as if it were a sacred mission. Sophie sewed a new bandana for Zoo, embroidered with both their names in sea blue and lavender thread. Isabella recorded herself reading a short story, her voice still hesitant, but unmistakably her own. Grace packed a fresh notebook, planning to document every detail of the journey, not just for Zoo, but for the children still waiting for a miracle to knock on their door. On the day Zoo left, no one cried. Sophie and Isabella stood tall, hands tightly clasped, watching the van pull away from the center gate. Not with longing, but with hope. Zoo sat by the window, eyes still looking out, and as the vehicle paused at the first red light down the street, he tilted his head, just slightly, as if to make sure his 2 small friends were still standing there, steady as ever, silently promising, "I'll come back, bringing something even more beautiful." Some departures don't mean goodbye. They are the beginning of a bigger journey. And some young hearts, once they learn how to love the right way, will also learn how to let that love travel far, no matter the distance. Zoo wasn't leaving the 2 girls behind. He was simply carrying their friendship further, to places their little hands couldn't yet reach, but where their hearts were already calling his name. The first days in Houston passed quietly and attentively. The renowned therapy center that had invited Zoo was nestled within a vast garden, shaded all year round by trees, with gravel paths leading to bright and peaceful therapy rooms, like small homes designed for hearts that had once been broken. Here, therapy dogs were trained not only to obey commands, but to listen, not with their ears, but with their presence, something Zoo excelled at more than anyone. From the very first day, the trainers noticed an extraordinary quality in Zoo. It didn't need to be taught how to approach a withdrawn child, didn't need hand signals to know when to move closer or when to sit and wait beside someone. The way it rested its head on the knee of a non-verbal autistic boy for an entire morning, the way it lay still in the arms of a little girl who had just lost her father without blinking for 30 minutes. Everything left the training team in awe. They had once seen Luna do the same, and now they saw it again, in Zoo. On the 10th day of the program, as the morning still lingered in peace, a van from the outskirts quietly stopped at the center's gate. Grace, who had flown in from Austin to check on Zoo's progress, recognized the vehicle immediately. The door opened. An old dog with dark fur streaked with silver stepped out with her caretaker. Though her steps were slow and her back slightly curved, her eyes carried an unmistakable calm. It was Luna. At that moment, Zoo was sitting under a tree with a group of children. Its eyes suddenly lifted. Then it stood up. Not barking, not rushing, just taking slow, deliberate steps as if to confirm that what it sensed was real. When the two dogs locked eyes, the entire garden fell silent. No one gave a signal. No one said a word. Zoo moved closer, lowered its head, and gently touched noses with Luna. Luna stood firm, then slowly placed her muzzle on Zoo's head. A soft gesture, enough to dissolve all distance and re-establish something that transcended language. No one knew whether Zoo remembered its mother, but in that moment, everyone understood. Some bonds don't require memory to be preserved, only a soul to recognize. The two dogs lay together under the tree for the rest of the afternoon. No one asked them to. No one guided them. But no one had the heart to interrupt that sacred stillness. That evening, in the center's hall, a special event was held. A talk titled, "The Circle of Healing with Therapy Animals." The host introduced it formally but warmly, and after a few short remarks, two little girls, Sophie and Isabella, stepped onto the stage. On the screen behind them was an image of Zoo lying beside Luna. Below it was the quote, "You don't have to be whole to help someone heal. You just have to be willing to sit beside them." Isabella spoke first. Her voice was still soft, but each word was clear and powerful. She shared about the days she couldn't speak, about the first time she touched Zoo and whispered the word soft, and about the feeling of safety that no one else could give her, except Zoo. Sophie followed with her story of Rex, of the loneliness when no one understood how deeply she missed her old dog, and then about the first time she saw Isabella hugging Zoo, and realized that love could expand instead of divide. "We once thought that if we shared Zoo," Sophie paused, her eyes scanning the audience. "Maybe it meant we didn't love Zoo enough. But then we realized, true love is making sure the good doesn't stop with us." The room fell silent. Then applause erupted, and more applause followed. The air grew warm, as if someone had opened the door and let sunlight into the heart of the night. Grace stood at the back, overwhelmed with emotion. She had never seen Zoo explained better than this, not with statistics, not with training records, but through the very children who had once been wounded and now carried light. Some reunions aren't just about seeing each other again. They are the continuation of a sacred journey. When Luna rested her muzzle on her daughter's head, as if passing on her mission, it was also the moment Sophie and Isabella laid down the first lines for a new generation of healing. And Zoo, not just Luna's pupil, but a symbol of something miraculous. Love does not diminish when shared. It multiplies, quietly, persistently, and deeper than anything else. A year had passed since that fateful moment in Houston, when Zoo and Luna lay side by side beneath the tree, like two gateways connecting two generations of healing. And now, with spring returning once again, the Austin Rescue Center had taken on an entirely new spirit. No longer a place associated with separation or sorrow, it had become a destination for miraculous connections. A place where forgotten stories found new chapters through the warm, watchful eyes of a quiet dog. That day, the energy was vibrant from early morning. Small tents were set up across the yard, showcasing photos, crafts, and handwritten letters from hundreds of children who had been inspired by Zoo. Hanging across the large gate was a gentle message: healing hearts. Healing is not a destination. It's a journey of hearts willing to share. On the modest wooden stage, beneath the sunlit awning, two girls stood tall, holding microphones with the kind of courage only a year of transformation could bring. Sophie, now confident and radiant, and Isabella, still gentle, but her voice now steady and clear like the melody of early spring. Between them, Zoo lay peacefully, his head cradled in their small hands, eyes half closed as if he were listening, not needing to do anything, just be present. Isabella spoke first, smiling softly. We used to think Zoo was our dog, but then Zoo taught us that the most precious things in life aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be shared. Sophie followed, her eyes glowing with pride. We shared Zoo, and then Zoo helped us share ourselves, the sadness, the joy, and all the things we didn't know how to say before. The outdoor audience fell silent, as if making room for the whisper of two hearts that had once been broken, and it was that very vulnerability that gave their words such power. They spoke about the blog, Zoo's Circle of Healing, now home to over 10,000 young members across the country, each week bringing new stories, drawings, poems, and voice recordings about loneliness, healing, and the smallest of dreams. Rachel and Mrs. Winters sat in the front row, hands intertwined like old friends who had become true allies. They once struggled to name the differences, once hesitated to share what they loved most. But today, they stood as living proof of the program's message. Love isn't a battle to win. It's a circle, open for anyone to step in. To the left of the stage, a large photo had been displayed. Zoo and Luna, lying beside each other beneath the same Houston tree. Below it were hundreds of children's signatures, each one a testament that love had touched them, that even the smallest presence could be the key to an entire world of peace. As the event neared its end, Grace stepped onto the stage and placed her hand gently on Zoo's head. She couldn't hide the emotion in her eyes now glistening as she looked out at the crowd, no longer just parents and volunteers, but therapists, educators, and social workers from across the state. Zoo was once a dog left behind, Grace began. Back then, he didn't bark, he didn't run. He just looked, his eyes asking a question without words. "Does anyone see me?" She paused, her hand still resting on Zoo's back. And today, that answer didn't come from just one person. It came from thousands. Love doesn't have to hold tight to be real. Some love only grows stronger when we choose to share it. Applause filled the space, not just loud, but meaningful. What resonated most wasn't the sound, but the glances exchanged, the nods, the quiet smiles. Children held each other's hands. Grown-ups, for the first time, believed that sharing didn't mean losing. Zoo didn't get up. He stayed still, like a small, steady bridge connecting hearts. But his tail wagged gently. And in that exact moment, the two girls, Sophie and Isabella, leaned in together and wrapped their arms around Zoo. There was no need for a closing line. This journey didn't have an ending. It simply kept unfolding, like an ever-widening circle, spreading through each touch, each whisper, each shared moment of empathy. Zoo was never meant to belong to just one family. He belongs to anyone with a heart open enough to love. And with every embrace that makes room for someone else, love doesn't fade. It multiplies, like a circle that never truly closes. Maybe Zoo never knew he was special. He simply followed what his heart told him. To lie beside a child when she cried, to place an old toy between two trembling hands, or to stay, even after being left behind. But it was exactly from those simple, quiet acts that a circle of love was formed, not beginning with a miracle, nor ending with one, but with hands reaching out to meet, with eyes that recognize each other, and with hearts that once ached, now knowing they are not alone. And what about you? Have you ever met a dog who changed your heart? Share your story in the comments below, because maybe, just maybe, what you write today might heal someone out there. If Zoo's journey has touched you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep spreading more moving stories like this one. Stories where kindness, compassion, and the quiet magic of connection still live on. Silent, but extraordinary.